This story happened to me about a year or two ago when I was visiting the home of a friend with benefits. Let's call my friend Tom. Tom and I had been seeing each other casually at that point for about a year and a half. I was in my mid-20s, and he was in his early 40s. I guess you could call our relationship beneficial because he enjoyed my company and in return, he helped me with some monthly expenses. Tom had always expressed his love for me, but I just didn't feel the same way. To be honest, if he wasn't helping me financially, I don't think I would date him at all. At the time of this story, Tom and I lived several hours away from each other by car and just under 2 hours by plane. Tom would occasionally fly to visit me for a long weekend. This time, I would be visiting his home for the very first time. When I arrived in Tom's city, it was daytime on a Friday. Tom had taken the afternoon off from work to show me around. We went out for lunch and shopped for a bit before we went back to his place. We pulled up to his home, which I must say, was beyond beautiful. Right away, I could see myself living there. I grew up in a very modest home, and I was living at that time in a tiny one-bedroom apartment. The home had been given to Tom by his parents as a graduation gift for him completing law school 10 years earlier. When I graduated from college, all I got was a pat on the back. When I walked into the home, I felt intimidated by its size and furnishings, but of course I did my best to hide my insecurity. Tom gave me a tour of the beautiful 5-bedroom, 5.5-bathroom home. He showed me to the master bedroom, which is the room he slept in, and of course I would be joining him there that evening. After touring his home, we went out for dinner, drinks, and a walk downtown. We were back at his place and ready for bed by 1 the next morning. During my sleep that night, I felt my hair being pulled and like I was being held down. I tried to move, but I couldn't move or anything. I feel paralyzed. I don't remember exactly how I acted, but Tom told me that I was tossing and turning and mumbling odd things. I remember being held down by a woman with light-colored hair and freckles resembling like Tom. When he managed to wake me up, I told him what I had encountered, and he assured me that no one was in the room with us and that we were alone. I could barely sleep that night. I just ended up watching videos on my phone while Tom slept like a baby. The next morning, which was Saturday, we had breakfast together at Tom's place. After breakfast, he received a disturbing phone call. One of his relatives had been arrested and he had to go to the local jail. He apologized that he had to leave but said he would be back in a few hours and left his credit card so I could go shopping. After he left, I walked to the master bathroom to take a shower. While I was in the shower, I heard a lot of moving around in the bedroom. I turned off the water so I could get a better listen to what was happening. "Tom, is that you?" I asked. No one answered and I went back to my shower. When I turned the water on again, the sound started again. Then I heard things being thrown around the room. I looked over at the vanity and all of Tom's personal care items started flying off and onto the floor. There was no one in the bathroom with me. The stuff was just falling on their own. I got out of the shower quickly and looked in the bedroom, and what I saw next really scared me. I saw the pictures on the bedroom wall had fallen onto the ground and broken. At first, I thought someone had broken into the house, but then I noticed that nothing had been rummaged through. I thought maybe the pictures weren't secured on the wall. I picked up the pictures and placed them on the bed and returned to the bathroom to blow dry my hair. The mirror was still foggy from my shower. I wiped the mirror with my hand, and what I saw next really sent shock through my entire body. In the mirror, standing behind me was the same angry woman from my dream the night before. When I turned around, she wasn't there. I looked in the mirror once more and she was gone. I quickly got dressed and ran down the street to a nearby park where I called a ride. My ride took me to a nearby coffee shop where I waited for Tom to pick me up about an hour later. I was far too startled to go shopping or sightseeing. When Tom came to pick me up, I told what had happened to me when I was at his place earlier. I could tell that he didn't believe me, and I wanted to forget about my experience. We never spoke about it again that day, and we enjoyed the rest of our day together. The next day, Tom was telling me about his family, including his mom, who had passed away right before he met me. He was showing me photos of everyone. He showed me a photo of a woman who looked exactly like the one I saw in my dream and in the bathroom mirror. I couldn't believe it. The creepy ghost was his mother. I told him that I thought I had an encounter with his mother's ghost. He chuckled and said, "Well, my mom was always jealous of every woman I brought around." After that day, I never visited Tom in his home again, and eventually we drifted apart. Thank you for listening to my story. Stay spooked.
When I was about 12 years old, my parents decided to send me away to summer camp for 2 weeks somewhere in rural Kansas. At the time we were living in Missouri, but my parents both grew up in Kansas, and we still had family there, including my favorite cousin who was about my age. This was my first time going to any summer camp, and I was excited because my cousin would be there, and as an only child, I cherished any time spent with my cousin, who we will call Jenny. The camp was on a large property, about 30 acres of land out in the middle of nowhere. There were children of all age groups attending this camp, and my cousin and I were in the same cabin with the 12, 13, and 14-year-old kids. The girls and boys had separate bedrooms and bathrooms, but we would interact during activities and meals. The first day we arrived, we met a boy who was 14, let's call him Kyle. Kyle was tall with dark features. His style was very gothic. He was a bit of a bully and tended to pick on the younger kids, especially the girls. He had been attending this camp since he was 6. South AG was well known to the chaperones, but not in the same way we knew him. The adults thought he was kind and helpful, but didn't seem to be acquainted with his other side. Every day Kyle would sit down to eat lunch with us and would offer to tell us ghost stories, but we told him no the first few times, until about the third day we agreed. Kyle began to tell us that the land the camp was built on was once a Native American cemetery, and the property was haunted. My cousin and I both looked at each other and laughed in disbelief. "Yeah, right, there's no way." I told him, "You'll see, you girls better sleep with one eye open," he told us. "If this place is so haunted, how come you continue to come back every year?" He assured us that the ghosts were friendly to him and they didn't bother him at all. We continued laughing at him, and the more we laughed, the more he assured us that the place was haunted. The ghosts who haunt this place make it their goal to reveal themselves to those who don't believe in their existence, he told us. That very night, when Jenny and I went to our room, we told some of the other girls what Kyle had told us, and they also laughed. After a few minutes of chatting, we all fell asleep. It was about 3 a.m. when I felt someone in the bed next to me. I opened my eyes and saw no one, so I rolled over and went back to sleep. When moments later I felt something pulling on my feet, I jumped up there. Standing in front of me was a little girl with a white dress on. She looked very angry. "What are you doing here? Are you lost?" I asked her, assuming she was one of the younger kids from the other cabin. She didn't respond, and I stood up and reached out to take her hand to walk her to one of the rooms where the adults slept, but as I stood up, she disappeared. That's when a few of the other girls, including Jenny, woke up and began asking me who I was talking to. I told them, "The little girl who was just here, I think she was lost, but she just disappeared." Everyone was confused and didn't know which little girl I was talking about. The next day, while we were getting dressed, Jenny asked me, "What was that about last night? Are you okay?" I assured her I was fine and changed the subject. Later, that day during lunch, while Jenny was grabbing her lunch from the buffet line, I sat down next to Kyle and said, "Hey, the ghosts who roam this place, can you describe them to me?" He said, "Why do you ask?" I told him I was just curious, but he didn't believe me. "You saw one, didn't you?" I told him I didn't think so. Then that's when he said, "It's usually a little girl. Her name is Maddie, and she wears a white dress. Sometimes she's alone, and sometimes she's with her parents." I couldn't believe it. The little girl he described was the same girl I saw the night before. Soon Jenny sat down, and the topic changed. That night I went to bed, and I must admit, it was difficult for me to fall asleep, but when I finally did, I felt the same thing the night before. Someone was in the bed with me, and when I put my hand out to touch them, there was no one. I was afraid to open my eyes because I didn't want to see the little girl again. I opened my eyes slowly, and there it was, a family, the little girl and her parents. I let out a gut-hurling scream so loud it woke everyone in the cabin. All the girls woke up, and the adults came rushing in and turning the lights on. They asked me what was wrong, but each time I opened my mouth to speak, I couldn't. I felt a hand over my mouth, and I felt paralyzed. Stuck to the chair I was sitting in while everyone questioned me about what was wrong. I looked through the window beyond everyone, and what I saw next was even scarier than anything I had ever seen. I saw the little girl hanging from a tree outside while her family cried. I couldn't believe I was watching the demise of the little girl I had been seeing. I just stared out the window as the tears rolled down my cheeks. "What's out there?" one of the chaperones asked before turning around to look through the same window. I could tell by the look on her face, she didn't see the same thing I was seeing. "What is it?" "There's nothing out there," she said when she turned back around. At this point, everyone was looking through the window with confusion. There was an analog clock on the wall. I looked at it, and the time read 3:15 a.m. Later on that day, the camp director called my parents to let them know what had happened. I spoke to my mom, and she asked me if I was okay and whether I wanted to leave camp. I told her no, even though I wanted to, because I knew if I left, Jenny would likely have to leave also, and I didn't want to ruin her summer by us having to leave camp after only being there for about a week. We had made it halfway through, and I didn't want to quit. Besides, everyone who completes camp would get a gold medal, and I wanted to earn my gold medal. As I hung up the phone with my mom, I looked out the open door of the chaperone office, and there stood Kyle with a smirk on his face. He was standing around, and I could tell he was waiting for me to leave the office. After the phone call with my mom, I walked out of the office. Kyle and I were face to face when he said, "Wow, you actually have the guts to stay. Huh? Most people don't last a day after they meet Maddie," he said while laughing. "Wait until you see what else awaits you." I was so scared even I couldn't believe I was staying another week. I was soon beginning to regret my decision to stay after hearing Kyle promise that the worst is yet to come. After lunch that day, there was an activity planned where we had to hunt for clues that lead to a key that would unlock a prize. The activity took us on a hunt to find clues in pairs, and as luck would have it, I was paired with Kyle. "The universe hates me," I said after I saw that I had pulled his name out of the hat. "Hello, partner," he said with a grin on his face. We started our hunt, and we found a few clues very quickly, which put us in the lead among the 6 groups. "Watch out! Maddie is behind you!" Kyle yelled, spooking the crap out of me. I screamed loudly, and one group that was nearby looked at us in confusion as Kyle laughed. "That's not funny," I told him. He continued laughing hysterically, and then he said, "Hey, I think the next clue is in that shed over there, but I have to run back to the cabin to use the bathroom." The cabin was at least a 5-minute walk away from where we were on the property, and 3 minutes if you ran. "Oh, please hurry," I told him. I wondered why he couldn't just use the bathroom outdoors, but I wasn't about to ask him. "I'll run. Don't worry though, we're leading," he assured me. "Just go in the shed and look around for the next clue. Here you go," he told me while handing me a flashlight. I took the flashlight and looked around, realizing I was all alone as Kyle ran back to the cabin. I opened the rusty door as it creaked. I turned the flashlight on and looked around for the next clue, but as I stumbled in the crowded shed, I couldn't find anything. That's when the batteries in my flashlight died, making the shed pitch black. Almost immediately, I felt a tap on my shoulder, and I turned around quickly, throwing my hands up. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It was the same people I saw the night before, but just the man and woman. I was face to face with them. "Hi, sweetie," the woman said. "We want you to come with us." I turned to run towards the door of the shed, and in front of the door stood the little girl, trapping me inside. I was screaming for help, but no one was coming, and after a few screams, the little girl covered my mouth with her hand. "Now turn around," the man said. I started crying, and I turned around, and there I was, watching the demise of the man and woman. The woman and the man were both holding muskets, and before they put the barrels in their mouths, they said in unison, "We will never be the same without our Maddie. We want to be with her." There, I watched their demise, and after it was all over, the little girl disappeared immediately, allowing me to run from the shed. Once out of the shed, I began throwing up and crying hysterically. As I raised my head, I saw Kyle standing in front of me laughing. I looked around, and there was no one else there but the two of us. I ran away from the shed, and the further away I ran, the closer I was to one of the adults, a tall woman with red hair and freckles. When I finally got up to her, she said very angrily, "Why are you guys over by that shed? The shed isn't even on the map. Let's go, young lady. You guys are in last place now," she said as she waved her hand at Kyle in the distance, calling for him to follow us. As we caught up with the other teams, the winning team was celebrating, and everyone else looked at us with confusion on their faces yet again. "Have you been throwing up?" the camp nurse asked. "I'm fine. I would like to call my mom, please." She walked me to the office, and together we called my mom. Once I heard my mom's voice, I broke down into tears and told her I wanted to come home. She didn't ask me any questions. She just said she would send someone to pick me up, since she was all the way in Missouri, about a 4-hour drive away. A few hours later, Jenny's parents came to pick us up. The whole ride back to her house, I kept apologizing, and everyone assured me it was okay. "You had a really tough time, huh? I know it was your first time at camp and the first time away from your mom and dad for so long," my aunt said, while my uncle just looked up in the rearview mirror and winked. Jenny held my hand the entire ride back to her house, which was about an hour and a half. Once we arrived at her house, my parents were there to greet us, and I just ran into my mom's arms and cried. When we returned to Missouri, my parents just assumed the same thing my aunt did, that I was homesick. I never spoke about camp with anyone, and I tried to forget the entire experience. Once, when I was a teenager, my mom and dad told the story of a little girl who met her demise on the property of the camp. She said the parents of the little girl were so distraught that they took their own lives. After I heard my parents tell the story, I knew that my experience at camp wasn't just my imagination. I did tell my parents that there was a bully at camp named Kyle who told me the story. When I told them his last name, they said they also knew Kyle's family and said they were a strange family with a little boy who was fascinated with the occult. I am now an adult with children of my own, and each year my mom suggests that I send them to camp. You never know, maybe they'll like it. You can't deprive them of their own experiences, she always says. I usually tune her out and hope that my children never ask to go to camp, and especially not the camp I went to.